That's good. I said, yeah, magistrate or judge or mayor always trumps any other title. So it's great to be with you all this morning. And Phil, thanks so much for mentioning this Rupp Arena. I say I had about 10 years of my life into this project. First time when I was elected, and then my very first State of the City address, I said, now there's all this chatter about moving Rupp Arena to the campus. Let's just put an end to that. Let's put a stake in the ground on us keeping it in downtown Lexington. Well, I thought we could get it done in 4 years. No way. You all know how these public projects are. No way we're going to get it done in that length of time. It took us 2 years or so to get through took 2 years to petition to the General Assembly for support for the project. And felt like that was a grilling. And then we didn't make it. But you know that old saying about if at first you don't succeed, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, start all over again. I see Scott. How you doing, Scott Alexander from Perry? So many of you all that I recognize in the audience, I'll get into trouble if I start singling out like I just did Scott. But I've been seeing him so much over in Eastern Kentucky. And I'll never forget Judge Mosley, when ran into you 2 days after the flood, and you'd picked everything up, you'd picked up your equipment, and you'd brought it down to, I forget now, was it Letcher? It was Letcher County. Yes, sir. Well, first things first, there's still some folks coming in, so I shouldn't get going so fast. I should wait, because everything I'm saying is going to be, as Jim Henderson said, if you were ready to announce $500 million in discretionary funding, this whole room would be filled. I really do appreciate the first things first is I want to thank you all for your public service. Now, how many of you are new to your roles, to the position, just elected? Well, I heard there was a whole slew. So congratulations, and thank you for about what you're getting into. It can be a real challenge. I remember I used to say when I was mayor that even on a good day, even on a bad day, it was a great job. And that's the thing about it. I do thank everybody for their public service, and the folks who are retiring from public service, from their roles. We want to thank them. In fact, let's give everybody a big hand of applause for their public service. I'm not going to talk for very long this morning. I heard the governor did a good job yesterday, that he talked without any notes. And I'm going to tell you that I am not going to be able to do the same. I'm going to have to use some notes, because he had a lot to share as well. And I'm going to punctuate some of the things that he said. And that's not because I am casual with praise. But I do have to say that when he asked me to do this job 2.5 years ago and met with me, and he gave me what he wanted to get done and so forth, and I said, well, Governor, I said, I don't know how I'll do with this job, because I've never had a boss before, and you might be really hard to deal with, or hard to serve with. And I will tell you that it is the first time it happened. Now, I had plenty of partners with my brothers, working with my mother in our construction business, and working a lot of places all over the state, and which I enjoyed enormously. But I told them didn't know exactly. Well, I came to find out real quickly that this is a guy who is on top of everything. As I said, I can't make this up. I'm sharing this because I appreciate someone who is really dedicated. You all know what I'm talking about, because you're in the same spot. When you are dedicated to your work, then you wake up every morning. You put one foot in front of the other, but you're always thinking, how am I going to help my constituents? How am I going to help the people? And what he does in that is he keeps us on our toes. I mean, for example, right now, we are still having meetings every 2 weeks with him on the Western Kentucky tornado recovery. And we have meeting with him on the Eastern Kentucky flood recovery project as well. In fact, I told him the other day, I said, Governor, I think you work harder than the devil does on Sunday. You know, he is really that. He is a very hard worker, and I appreciate that. So anyway, I wanted to put that out right out of the gate. I know you're going to hear from Bobby Joe a little later this afternoon. Where is Bobby Joe? She was right here. Okay. Oh, did y'all hear that? See, I knew I was going to get applause if I said Bobby Joe. Thanks, Judge. So you're going to hear from Bobby Joe and our field reps. I'm going to come back to them here in just a minute. Phil and Jim, how much time did y'all give me? Because I'm not going to take it up. 20 minutes? Well, there's more people keep coming in. I don't know what's going on. All right. Well, I do appreciate you all inviting me to be with you. I'm going to talk this morning about some of the activities of the cabinet. I'm going to talk about where we are. I'm going to talk about the plans going forward and some of the really wide-ranging projects that we're involved with. Senator Jimmy Higdon, who some of you all know from in central Kentucky, of course, in Marion County, and he covers several counties in his role as a senator. But Senator Higdon, in one of his committee meetings, he's chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee, and in the last couple of meetings, or the last several meetings, he's come to describing I get my work at first, but now I deflect it because I'm going to tell you why. But he's come to describing me as the master of disaster. Well, I immediately deflect that to our whole cabinet and, of course, to the agencies and the other agencies in state government who have been so helpful in these disasters. But I want to tell you a little bit about what the Transportation Cabinet has had to do, because I have come to describe it as not just the Transportation Cabinet, but the Transportation and Disaster Recovery Cabinet. And why is that? Well, let me talk about more recently the flood response. We didn't want to claim a title like Master of Disaster at all. We didn't want that at all. And the fact is that we've gotten a lot of experience from the tornado recovery to the flood recovery in an ironic way, and regrettably, in fact, but responsibly, we've gotten a lot of experience, and I'll talk about some of that. Even before the terrible 1-2 punch of the tornadoes last December and the flooding in January, we had multiple lesser flooding events, severe and damaging ice and snowstorms, and long periods of extreme heat. And most of you in the room, unfortunately, are having to share in the consequences of some of these events. Now, I don't think that we can say these are freak occurrences anymore. Extreme weather is and has become almost normal, and that has implications for Kentucky, Transportation Cabinet, and our infrastructure. And I'll have more to say on that in just a few minutes. But when disaster is piled on disaster, you learn something else, something that goes way beyond just the nuts and bolts of disaster response. You learn what your people are made of. As Governor Beshear has said, we are all Team Kentucky on these projects, from counties far removed from the flood zone. I want to thank those of you. Hold your hand up if you know some of your colleagues, some of your friends, some of your neighbors, some of your citizens who helped in either the tornado or the flood response. Just hold up. Now, see, isn't that remarkable? I mean, that is truly, truly remarkable. It just shows that we're all out there to help one another. Now, I'm most familiar, of course, with the response from the Transportation Cabinet. I'll never forget coming back from seeing Judge Alexander, Judge Dobson, and others in the affected East Kentucky counties more recently. Same thing when I saw Jack Whitfield a little earlier in Western Kentucky. But I'll never forget coming back one day from Eastern Kentucky, impacted counties, when we were on the Mountain Parkway, and in the opposite lane was a convoy of transportation cabinet equipment. And there were literally in that convoy, and they were coming all the way from Western Kentucky. And in that convoy were about 50 pieces of equipment. Altogether, we had about 300 employees from beyond the impacted counties. So altogether, we were, including the impacted counties, we had more than 1,500 employees. These are front line. So that doesn't count the ones that were behind the curtain, behind the scenes, helping organize things, which has been really, really significant. So I want to also point out that there are folks like our Commissioner of the Department of Rural and Municipal Aid, who I've already mentioned, Bobby Jo Lewis, but also her field representatives, Doug Taylor and Kenny Morgan and Barry Davis. Will y'all join me? They're sitting right over here. I thought y'all were over here, and now you're right over here. Okay. And y'all please join me in giving them a hand applause too. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. These fellas they are really committed, and I know that many of you that deal with them feel that just like I do. So you're going to hear from Bobby Jo this afternoon on local governments, on FD 39, road servicing projects, emergency county road aid, federal programs like TAP and CMAQ, and you'll have a chance to hear from her in the breakout session, of course, this afternoon. But meanwhile, this flood response is our job number one. Now, the cabinet, as I said, has gone beyond its normal routine of just transportation, of just roads and bridges. We really were the first of the first responders in both the tornado and the flood recovery. Why is that? Well, you all know this. Before the first responders can get to folks, they got to get the roads cleared. So that really was our first job, and we were the first of the first responders. Now, we examined 1,300 bridges. 1,300. Now, these were public bridges, the state and the county. On top of that were all the private crossings, the smaller private bridges. But we inspected that many in 2 weeks. Out of that, we discovered that there were more than 100 that needed either a significant repair or a complete rebuild. And so far, we have already let contracts on 40 of them, and 5 of them have already been completed. Now, these are the public crossings. These are the ones that are more than 20 feet. 40, I said, well, I had old numbers, y'all, forgive me. We have 18 have been recommissioned or replaced, and 41 more are under contract for repair or replacement. And contracts are in development for another 94. So crews have constructed 50 temporary crossings. These are low water diversions using culvert pipes and covering materials. Now, as for privately owned bridges, the cabinet is coordinating today with FEMA and for assessments and pre-approvals, which will allow the counties to provide temporary emergency access to homes that are still livable but currently have no access to a highway. I want to talk next about KYTC, the Transportation Cabinet, and resiliency. You know, that word resiliency has kind of a stretch to it to get to it. What does it actually mean? Well, the way I translate that is it means long-term sustainability. Something that we do today is going to have a long-term value to it, not just for tomorrow, not just for today and tomorrow, but a long-term value. In the days and the weeks following the floods, in one of his updates, Governor Beshear was asked by a reporter about rebuilding in the flood area. in a way that does not simply invite another flood disaster a few years down the road. And the governor said, and I quote, "I absolutely think that when we build back, we must build in a way that is more resilient." But he went on to say that folks need to understand that's not something you can just say we're going to do and it happens. In other words, you can't turn it on like a light switch. These are projects, even if it's homes and a community that we're imagining, that take a little time. The governor noted that the challenges that come with a project, especially when the geography and topography limit your options, that these are significant challenges. The obvious challenge in eastern Kentucky, for example, is the limited amount of flat land. And that leads to other questions, all of which are related, all of which are challenging. Where else are you going to rebuild if your only property is in a floodplain? And what about the emotional ties that people have, that their ancestors may have lived in a place? What about those links and those ties and those challenges? As the governor noted, there are many complexities, no easy answers. I mentioned earlier the pattern of extreme weather has implications for the Transportation Cabinet. We talk a lot about resiliency, the construction of roads and bridges in ways that better withstand extreme weather and thus last longer. And the importance of this is obvious when you think about this. The Transportation Cabinet is responsible for maintaining more than 9,000 bridges and 64,000 lane miles of pavement. That is the 7th largest bridge network in the country, the 7th largest, and the 8th largest pavement network in the United States. So that's significant. And your county governments, what you know is that you've got a lot of stake in this too, because you've got the responsibility for more than 5,000 local bridges. So resiliency is something, sustainability is something that the cabinet has already been working on for a number of years. Currently, we're working with the University of Kentucky to develop a resilience improvement plan. And that plan includes the study of projected climate impacts to the state, an analysis of the infrastructure assets that are most vulnerable to those impacts. And that'll help us understand better our risk. Also help us consider and emphasize resiliency needs during project selection and scoping. Climate change and extreme weather events, such as we have especially experienced in the past just year, are affecting the life cycles of our transportation systems, and they are expected to intensify. There's no shortage of natural hazards for us to contend with. Flash floods, river floods, slides, and sinkholes cause the most frequent damage. And other potential hazards include seismic activity, tornadoes, severe thunderstorms, hailstorms and ice storms, and wildfire. And believe it or not, annually we average almost $40 million in emergency repair costs. And all of these numbers are trending upwards. So, bottom line on that is we are placing resiliency and sustainability as priorities in selecting bridge and pavement projects. And we also have efforts underway to inventory pavements that are vulnerable to slides. And Bobby Joe may be able to talk a little bit more about that. I want to dial back for a minute and talk, I said that the scope of our functions in transportation goes today beyond the bridges and the roads. In both the Western Kentucky recovery and the Eastern Kentucky recovery, we had the mission, an expanded mission to bring in travel trailers for temporary housing. That was not on my job description when the governor asked me to take this job. Didn't know about that one. Didn't know it wasn't on the job description that we were going to do debris removal either. But the way we looked at it was when the counties needed help, I said right out of the gate, and the governor supported this, he was right there with us on this. We said, you know, we're not going to, he said this. He said, listen, he said, don't think about county lines here. Don't get into that, whether or not it's a state road or a county road. He said, right now, we need to do all we can to help. And the state had the assets. I'm glad to see Judge Mosley shaking his head and nodding, because that's very helpful. Judge Dobson, I think he was here as well, and others. But we did not want to, when there was a need, we didn't want to have a debate about who was responsible. We knew that at the end of the day, if we did our work right and well, and we managed things, that we'd very likely get the reimbursements that we deserved. So we went beyond our scope with bringing travel trailers into Western Kentucky, over around 300. We had 80 that were available for us from Western Kentucky when the floods came in Eastern Kentucky. And Kyle Pote, who is our Chief District Engineer in District 1 over in Paducah in Western Kentucky, Kyle led the mission for the trailers in after the tornado. Well, Kyle stepped up, and because he had this experience and he had 80 trailers available, within 2 days of the flood, we had trailers in Eastern Kentucky in the most affected counties. We did the same thing with debris removal. Debris removal, not typically in the scope of the Transportation Cabinet, but what we have and what I have learned that we have in the Transportation Cabinet is we've got a backbone of experienced project managers. And as a result, you know, when they see a task, whatever it might be, they are able to get their arms around that task and put a schedule to it, put a plan to it, put a budget to it. So that's why I've come to also describe the cabinet and the folks there as the operations backbone of state government. So now let me shift over the last thing I really want to talk about. Oh, how are we doing on time, y'all? We're still good? Jim, you're just being generous. I know you're being nice. You're thinking I'm going to have more of that discretionary money. I know what you're saying. Well, y'all going to have to talk to the legislature about that now. We'd like to have it. We'd like to have it. So I want to talk about the infrastructure. I want to talk really quickly about our EV plan. Then I want to talk about our mega projects, and then I'll be done. Okay? Our EV plan, our electric vehicle charging plan, as many of you, as almost everybody here in the room knows, Kentucky is really becoming quickly the electric vehicle battery capital of North America, perhaps the world. Between the Ford plant in Glendale, Elizabethtown, Hardin County, and the Envision plant in Bowling Green and Warren County, that's almost $9 billion of investment. Now, I know you heard the governor talk about that yesterday, but let me punctuate it a little bit differently. I was fortunate more than 35 years ago to travel back and forth to Japan. I observed when Martha Lane Collins was negotiating the Toyota plant. And I got to observe this project from a little bit of a distance. But the main theme of this project that I would share with you is, think of what Toyota has meant to Kentucky. Think of the way that it pretty much transformed Georgetown, Scott County. It's impacted Lexington, of course, dramatically. I remember Toyota saying we really moved to Lexington, to central Kentucky. That was more than 35 years ago. And Toyota was like a locomotive. Others came and followed, more than 160 supplier plants in Kentucky. Toyota was an $800 million investment in 1985. $800 million. In present day dollars, that would be $2.3 billion. So just think about it. Between Ford and Envision is $9 billion, almost 4 times the amount of Toyota's investment in present day dollars. That gives a pretty good indicator of what it represents in terms of economic value. So, where are we as a state in getting ready for this revolution? And I say revolution because it's more than a transformation. This electric vehicle thing is more than a transformation. I've been driving an electric vehicle for a little over 2.5 years. I get range anxiety sometimes if I drive in fact, I went to Bowling Green and came back, and I almost lost it on the Bluegrass Parkway. I was down to about 10 miles, and I thought, I don't know if I'm going to make it back, but I did. But anyway, so the solution to that, of course, is the EV charging model that is now a part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. So Transportation Cabinet has the responsibility within the bipartisan infrastructure law to implement the electric vehicle charging project for the state. And we're beginning, the phase one is putting 32 charging stations at 50-mile increments along the parkway, along the interstates and the parkways. We were one of the first to get approval from the U.S. Department of Transportation. We are well into our implementation. Now, when I say implementation, that means planning, because the road, the journey is the safest when the roadmap is the clearest. So we're putting a good plan together. That's what a good plan is. It's like a roadmap, okay? And that plan includes requests for information, which we've distributed. We got 36 responses, so there's a number of private companies that are ramping up and will be providing then responses. We are going out with our request for proposals, second part of our procurement phase, by the end of December. And we should have then actual work underway mid-year next year toward getting these first 32 stations up and running by the end of 2024. Now, what does a station look like? Well, I'm a little bit familiar with it because I've been using them for a couple of years now, but the stations along the interstates and the parkways will have up to 10 ports, each. So that means at any point in time, 10 vehicles could be charging at a station. Now remember, this is phase one. Interstates, parkways. We're going to then build it out beyond that in phases 2 and 3, beyond what's called the superchargers or the fast charging stations. A fast charging station will get you charged in about 30 minutes. That's pretty significant. So phases 2 and then 3, phase 3 will be more destinations, so more coming into communities and towns and cities with the electric vehicle chargers. Again, importantly, within this first phase, we will a charging station will be no further from a parkway or an interstate than 1 mile. So they'll be within a mile of a parkway or an interstate. We're in the process of selecting those locations. Again, they're 50 miles apart on the interstates and the parkways. All right, finally, I want to talk a bit about when I took this job, the governor said, Jim, I've got 3 projects that I want you to really focus on. I want you to focus on the Brent Spence Bridge, 3 mega projects. Brent Spence Bridge, completing the Mountain Parkway, and completing the bridge from Henderson, the I-69 bridge from Henderson over to Evansville. Well, I am pleased to report that we are underway on all of those projects. And I am knocking on wood here. We got grant proposals in for the Brent Spence Bridge. It is the poster child for the infrastructure law. 3 presidents have been on the banks of the Ohio River, looked at it and said, we're going to bring you a new Brent Spence Bridge. Now, that's going to happen this time. I tell you, I am just as, well, I'll knock on wood again. I better be careful. But I'm glad that somebody, it doesn't matter what part of Kentucky you're from. If you drive north on 71 and 75, you go across that current Brent Spence, and it's a white knuckle drive. What we're going to do, and a lot of people don't realize this, heck, I didn't realize it myself until I studied it, but it's not taking down the existing Brent Spence. What it means is, in fact, I say that bridge is built hell for stout. but it means that we're going to reduce the lanes from 4 going north and south each way, or 8 altogether. We're going to reduce it back to what it was originally intended to have, which was 3 lanes with emergency access on both sides. And then we're going to build a new companion bridge to the west, just to the west, which will have 8 to 10 lanes on it. So it will then give us the capacity that we need. Today, it is the second greatest truck bottleneck in the country, the second highest truck bottleneck in the country. 160,000 vehicles a day are crossing it, and it was designed for 80,000. So that tells you a little bit about the significance of this project. But the good news is President Biden is one of those 3 presidents that stood on the banks of the Ohio and said that we need a new Brent Spence Bridge. The other 2 projects, Jim, it does look like you're about to give me the hook. Okay, all right. I'm gonna hurry up here. Oh, you're getting signals from the back. Okay. What's it supposed to be, 9:30? Oh, goodness, all right. I-69 crossing underway. That project we're already doing 9 miles to approach it, and we're working with Indiana to get the bridge project. I thought I was only used to doing projects above ground, what they call vertical, but I'm liking this transportation business too. And the last one that we're working on, the governor really wanted, of course, is finishing the Mountain Parkway all the way into Prestonsburg. We've had the ribbon cuttings we've had groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings on 2 segments. The last 13 miles is in planning now. We're going to go cross country with it, 4 lanes all the way, which means that we will have almost 80 miles of Mountain Parkway when that project is completed. So that was, for anybody from Eastern Kentucky, please, that was an applause line. Thank you all very much.